So I'm Mary Doyle. I'm a 20 plus year educator for Benland Pines schools. I am a sister, I'm a mother, and I'm a new grandmother as well. And I decided to run because I want to save our country. When Trump first ran in 2016, I could see the writing on the wall. I followed the right people, the journalists, the scientists on social media. I have friends in New York, and I was alarmed. I was really alarmed. And I turned into a keyboard warrior, which is not a good take. And I had, right? Yeah. And
Hey,
I
what
would
are you trying to say?
exactly right. And I would get into these, arguments with people who followed him for his media persona, but they didn't have enough background information to truly appreciate what a threat that he was to our country. And then I'm not going to, I'll say when, but I'm going to couch the when for the second term. I decided I had to do something because I needed to, if I had to have skin in the game, I had to prove it. And so I filed to run, and I didn't even know who else had filed to run. I mean, that's where I was at. It was like for my own mental health, I needed to drive my concern, my passion, and my voice into something that I felt that was going to elevate the dialogue,
Mm,
regardless of the plus 14 that GOP holds in our district, right? I'm
right.
not naive about these things. Teachers are data driven. We know how to take information, how to, reduce it down into pieces where we can understand and then have measurable outcomes based upon
Right.
them. So that's kind of where I came from, to be honest.
You
And
show your math,
yeah,
it's
exactly. Yes,
now, I mean,
exactly.
they don't have to do that on the other side, but for whatever reason, we like to prove our assertions while we,
Yes,
endeavor
for
to
sure.
make them. And so
Yeah.
that's a unique approach is, not
Hmm.
you not just coming up with stuff whole cloth. So I
Right.
mean, I think that is like as pure a reason to want to be a congressperson as you can get to. But what I want to ask is, just as a follow-up, just to kind of, put a little nice bookend on it is being a teacher, what do you think that instills in you or has engendered in you to maybe pursue something like this?
Well, I mean, this is going to sound really odd, but it goes back to eighth grade. um, we took
Lots
a
of stuff happened in eighth grade,
yes,
believe me. I remember some of it.
middle school is traumatic. We all know that. Um, but with that said, it was interesting. I was adopted into a really religious family, and there was zero expectation of me to do anything but become a housewife and a mother, to be honest. And so I had to kind of carve my own path into becoming the person that I am, and
Yeah.
that includes getting an education beyond high school. I had to figure it out on my own. I had to fund it on my own, and I finally paid off my student loans, 6 years ago, when I was 51. It took me that long to pay them off. And so my appreciation for education and what it means to carve your path is really strong. But in eighth grade, we took a personality profile. And what was interesting, and I never forgot this, it said, you should be a politician. It was one of those psychological profiles that they
Yep.
had on the
Yep.
Scantrons, and they put it in the machine and and it was like, oh, that's interesting, and I was thinking, you know, yeah, I'll, maybe think about it, but it never quite happened. My path changed,
Right.
after getting my degree, after having my children, after having to work through university and waiting tables and bartending and doing all the things and stuffing envelopes with, my tips to pay the electric bill kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Um, so after my daughters became adults, and like I said, leading up into these elections, I realized that I have the time and energy to devote to something that is greater than myself.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where I land right now, is I have that time and that energy to land here and to speak my truth, and taking my education training and sitting in classrooms where, with I taught second and third grade for 8 years. Then I rolled up to fourth, and then I rolled up to fifth. And then I was student services, which is like a chief vice principal and athletic director at a small community school. And I had to teach middle school, and I had to support SPED teachers as well and do all those things. And what you learn, and then I also got my administrative license on the way, which is a deep dive into governance and policy,
Right, right,
ethics, right? And so taking all those bits and pieces over the years, it's allowed me to really appreciate and understand what it means to dig into something that is extremely hard.
right.
You,
And
you,
full of nuances
yes,
and rule making and rule
yes.
breaking,
So,
and
talk
so
about
it
that.
sounds like schools are more than just a microcosm for governments because, I mean, honestly, I mean, it's almost a one-to-one analog. It's about the governance and the
Mhm,
well-being of people, and so speaking of people,
mhm.
we have a large contingent of left-leaning voters,
Yes.
and arguably young and old that are skeptical of the Democratic Party. And why would you suppose that is?
Oh, those young folks.
If
So
you accept the premise of the question,
I do, I do. And I do want to circle back to your first question of what it means to be a district congressperson.
Sure, sure.
Well, the people, the young left-leaning voters are skeptical for a reason, and it's because they're paying attention.
Yeah,
These young voters that came of age during the Iraq War, during the 2008 financial crisis, skyrocketing tuition, stagnant wages, climate instability, and now their housing costs are making home ownership, it feels virtually impossible. And they've watched both parties talk about this reform. Um, but that's happening during corporate consolidation that's
right,
accelerating, and billionaires are growing richer, and the student debt has ballooned to this massive thing that it's hard to rationalize any person taking out a loan right now. And so from their perspective, the Democratic Party, it often campaigns on these bold changes, healthcare reform, climate action, economic fairness, but then governs in these incremental little steps. And this incrementalization, it doesn't feel adequate when rent is
right,
50% of your income. You don't think Social Security is going to be there when you retire. So
right,
this
right.
creates a massive trust gap, right? These young voters, they see these campaign donations from the corporate PACs, from pharma, from fossil fuels, from defense contractors. And even when the Democrats vote the right way, and I'm critical of both parties. I think there's corruption everywhere.
Right.
The optics of the money and the politics, it undermines the credibility. So when these young voters, they want moral clarity. They want moral clarity, not just in our own country. They want it on Gaza. They want it on climate. They want it on corporate power. They don't want to see this triangulation of forces that are working against them. So the skepticism isn't apathy. It's demand for structural reform, and they want antitrust enforcement. They want student loan restructuring. They want climate resilience and investment and healthcare decoupled from their employment, and real limits on money in politics. And so even when Democrats say the right things, the young voters, they want the proof. They want to know,
Right.
what did you
Yeah,
pass?
right.
Who did it help? And what changed? They want those measurable outcomes. So
Right.
if the Democratic Party wants to earn back their trust, it has to move from managing these systems into actually transforming them. Transformative.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds, it's sort of like, it sounds like what you're describing is that, for all their good intentions, they keep providing half measure solutions to full measure problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's not that their heart is in the wrong place 80% of the time, but I also want to acknowledge that you are, that you put a pin on it, I think, in the
Mhm.
sense that there are certain issues, certain topics that younger voters or more left-leaning voters feel disenfranchised by the Democratic Party, and they don't even know if that party is right for them. But I think
Mhm.
you're making a strong case for the sort of populism that has been essentially sidelined by the
Mhm.
Democratic Party since 2016. So I became an independent in 2016 after being a burned out Bernie bro.
Yeah, I
And
hear that.
yeah, so my question to you is how would you approach engaging independent or even conservative voters?
Oh, for sure. So that starts with your representation and how you show up, and you show up consistently, and it's just not during the election season. So if elected, I would hold, obviously, unlike Mr. Bentz, regular in district town halls across Southern and Eastern Oregon, including in counties that don't vote for me, which tends to be the majority. And not these curated events that he is so well at doing, right? The
Yeah,
actual
I've
real.
been to one. Yeah,
Oh yeah, I'm sure you can speak to that, right? It is not, it's the real forums. And you also need to, I need to support establishing a geographically diverse advisory council that incorporates agricultural and tribal leadership and small business owners and veterans and healthcare providers and educators and laborers and unions and energy producers. And it's so that the policy, it reflects the lived reality, but not the DC assumptions. It's like when
right,
you work, right, when you work in education, we talk about levels of ceiling. In the classroom, you're like at the 0 foot level. When you get, that's the student. When you're the teacher, maybe the 1,000 foot. The principal is the 5,000. Downtown's the 30,000. But when you're flying at 30,000, you don't know what the climate is at the zero level, right?
yeah,
So, secondly, there has to be transparency. So, that comes from published detailed policy briefs explaining how I vote and why, especially when an issue is complicated, because people deserve to know the trade offs. And
right,
third, I don't believe representation means agreeing with everyone.
sure,
I mean, that's not going to happen. It means weighing those impacts honestly. On water, that means recognizing tribal treaty rights, family farm viability, and private well concerns simultaneously. And then on public demand or lands, it means balancing recreation, grazing, wildfire
right,
mitigation, and conservation, and not defaulting to some kind of ideology. And then
right,
fourth, you have to prioritize the constituent services, right? When someone is a Democrat, Republican, and independent, or a non-voter, if they're dealing with VA delays or Social Security issues or wildfire insurance policies or federal permitting delays, my office works for them,
yeah, yeah,
all of them. It's just like public education. We serve everyone who shows up,
right,
regardless.
yeah,
So that's what
right,
education trains us to do in translating that skill set into, working for governance in a political field is you have to serve everyone. So
yeah,
that at the end of the day, the representation isn't about party, it's about stewardship. So the
yeah,
district reserves a congressperson who treats this seat in CD2 as a responsibility to all 700,000 plus residents, and not just the ones who agree with you,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like, this job is going to require accountability to the plurality of this district. It's massive. It's
Yes.
huge,
Yes.
and it'd take a great deal of effort to get the message out there. So here's I'm using the phrase, I guess, spicier question. Under what circumstances would you accept corporate or PAC money?
That's corporate. That's funny. I'm just kidding. I'm
Just,
being facetious. I know I'm being facetious with that one, but I won't. I will. I don't, and I will.
yeah,
And I will never accept corporate PAC money. It's a hard stop. I just won't.
yeah,
And I want to differentiate that there's a fundamental difference between individual donors and corporate PACs.
right,
Corporate PACs exist to advance the financial interests only of that company. Is
yeah,
to serve their bottom line. That's their legal purpose to their shareholders. So when members of Congress, when they take that money, it creates a minimum of a perception, but the reality is influence, right? So I believe representation should be accountable to the people, not the balance sheets of the corporations.
right,
But that does not mean that I reject organized groups like labor unions, small donor networks,
yeah,
and issue-based organizations that represent, the workers or the community interests. That's different. They're made
oh
up
yeah,
of people
Right.
pooling their hard-earned resources to advocate for a policy change. But corporate PACs that are tied to industries like pharmaceutical conglomerates and fossil fuel companies and defense contractors, oh my God, and vertically, integrated healthcare or, corporations and systems, absolutely no.
Right.
So especially in like districts like ours, where corporate consolidation has harmed our local mills, our small farms, our rural
Right.
hospitals, and
Right.
our independent businesses, it would undermine my credibility to take any money from the very entities that serve in pressure upon the people in this district. So if you're
Absolutely.
serious about restoring trust in government, we have to reduce that structural dependency on corporate on financing. So that's why, this campaign, go here, right? It's built on small donors and community support and transparency. And that's not just a slogan, it's my governing philosophy, to be honest.
Yeah. No, it
Yeah.
makes sense. And I think it's demonstrable integrity.
Mhm.
It's being able to look at the breakdowns of, who's getting money from where and being able to say, I understand
Mhm.
these allegiances, these things make sense to me. And honestly, like you said, it kind of comes down to you know, groups that are trying to advocate for products or services don't need help. They have advertising
Exactly.
departments for that.
Exactly.
People who are advocating for people, they
Mhm.
need the help. So let me ask you another money related question.
Sure.
Under, so would you make your support for foreign aid contingent on a particular nation's adherence to international law and human rights?
Absolutely. And it has to be applied consistently because foreign aid is one of the most powerful tools that Congress has.
Right,
Military aid in particular should never be unconditional. If we're
yeah,
sending weapons, security assistance, or taxpayer dollars abroad, there must be enforceable conditions tied to international humanitarian law,
right.
civilian protection, and transparent accountability. And this applies to allies and adversaries alike. Now, I want to be clear about two things, though.
Hmm.
First, humanitarian aid is different.
Right,
Food, medicine, disaster relief, those should not be cut off from civilian populations because of their government misconduct. And
right,
civilians should not be punished for the actions of their leaders. But
right,
second, conditional aid doesn't mean abandoning our strategic partners. It means setting standards and saying, if we're going to provide support, it must align absolutely with the rule of law.
right, right,
That is not being done in some countries. So Congress has oversight for a reason. And too often we waive these conditions and then act, oh, surprise, when the abuses occur.
right.
So we lose as a country credibility when we apply human rights standards selectively. In when we're
Yes,
captured by certain PACs like APAC, if we expect the compliance globally, we have to model consistently. So our foreign policy is strongest when it aligns with security law and values, not when it treats them as separate conversations. And
yeah,
that's why I absolutely will take zero APAC money. And I truly believe that any congressperson who does is complicit.
yeah,
When we're giving money to Israel, and I speak about this very differently. I am a freedom of belief. You believe what you want.
right,
But when your country is captured, like it is by Zionism, and we are giving money in arms with zero conditions or compliance, it frees up their spending in their government to give them universal free health care,
yeah,
to give
exactly.
them free
Yeah,
all these things.
right. We are
So,
underwriting a very
yes,
high standard of,
yes,
social safety net over there.
yes,
And, I'm glad that people are starting to recognize the delineation between Zionism,
yes,
Israel, and Judaism because for
yes,
too long those things have been conflated
yes.
and has endangered, in my opinion, people of the Jewish faith.
Oh,
When
for
we are
sure.
unable to
Yes,
differentiate those things, what a
yes.
Zionist regime does or what somebody believes with their heart and soul, That is, I mean, anyway,
Yeah.
I'm really glad to hear that you have parsed those things, and it also sounds like you are on board for what we used to be great at, which is our soft power, USA,
Oh, for
things like
sure.
that.
Yes.
Voice of America,
Yes.
when we were reaching
Yes.
out with something other than small arms,
Yes.
so
And it is devastating to see our soft power being co-opted by Christian nationalism. So it was
right,
like our own government is turning towards that, Zionism, but in a Christian nationalism way in our own country. And that's why I'm here.
yeah.
I mean, that's why there are coalitions of us across the country that are building networks that are very progressive in trying to get and elevate that voice. Because if we don't do it with the midterms, I honestly, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't even want to put the thought out there, but I think
Uh,
a lot of us
I
have the same
think that
concern.
the one thing most people can agree with when they're being honest with with themselves is that America would not survive a monoculture of belief. We
Yes.
would not make it as a,
Yeah.
single, monochrome kind of. Well, anyway, I'm mindful of time, so I
Okay.
want to move to our next question, which is, pardon me.
Okay.
Um,
Take a little drink of water. Tea here.
yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. Please do. So, this one is, so this one's kind of a two-parter. So let's break it out. I think I should have done that from the get-go, but consider it a two-parter if you'll humor me. Question A is, what are your thoughts on AI as it relates to the workforce?
Mhm. Okay. So AI, it can help, right? It can help in medicine and wildfire modeling and
Yeah,
infrastructure planning. But right now, it's scaling faster than governance. So I'm not anti technology, but I do support a temporary moratorium on large scale AI data center expansion until we have some very clear guardrails in place,
right.
right?
Yeah,
And they bring jobs.
yeah,
They particularly construction and some long-term technical roles, but the employment to resource consumption ratio is relatively low
yeah.
compared to the scale,
Right,
right? These
right.
trade-offs need some honest evaluations. And on that workforce side, the displacement is real.
Yeah,
And we need federal action on these worker transitions and apprenticeships, community college pipelines and labor protections.
right.
So AI doesn't strip wages and automate people into precarity or outsource accountability to the algorithms.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
and, and,
Yeah,
and then there's also the broader civil liberties question. AI infrastructure increasingly supports surveillance capacity. I mean, let's not
sure.
go down to Peter Thiel Palantir rabbit hole, but we know that both,
But yeah, I mean,
yeah,
there's
that's
a,
a whole different
yeah.
podcast right there, right? So,
But you're
in
right though. I mean,
yeah,
it's not all in service of the
yes,
people, or it's what it's being used for should
yes.
be more public facing.
Yes. And so it's the surveillance capacity is both corporate and governmental, right?
Yeah.
And before we accelerate that build out, we have to establish these privacy protections. I know this is a little bit more than workforce, but
No, no, I mean,
also need to address surveillance and privacy protections and limits on how these AI tools can be deployed domestically. And Denmark, Greenland, Denmark actually, they're trying to roll out a very profound concept when it comes to AI. And I think we need to model the same. It's like you own personally your likeness in
right,
your voice in your image, and they AI cannot co-opt that,
right.
because then we're going down the matrix rabbit hole with that one as well. So
Sure, sure. Well, and I've actually heard the notion of a data tax on these companies that harvest our data, take our images, I mean, steal
yes,
basically
yep,
every little megabyte of data that they can. It's
yes,
our stuff. We are the product. We should be getting a cut of that.
Exactly.
And one person even said that that would underwrite a universal basic income, which is a whole nother
Yeah, it's a whole
podcast. So
nother yes.
so let's move to the resource intensive aspect of AI, which is, you touched on it a little bit, but it's water and energy, which are both major concerns. I know in Lapine, I know down here in Medford, I mean, clear across the state and
Yeah,
Vail, Ontario.
yeah. So we're already seeing what happens when things move too fast. And Kotek is getting herself into a tangle in Hillsborough, especially because we have these generous property tax abatements for these data centers that have raised real concerns about school funding.
Right.
When districts rely on this predictable property tax revenue, and then we carve out these huge exemptions for these multinational tech companies that are buying their $500 million yachts and having their $50 weddings and $50 million weddings in Italy, our local communities are carrying that uncertainty and that cost. And then in Eastern Oregon, we have Morrow and Umatilla counties. Yes, they see growth with jobs, but yet they're also seeing groundwater stress and water quality issues where these industrial demand, it's intersecting with agriculture and residential use, and their wells are running dry. And
Yeah.
it's not theoretical, it's happening.
Yeah.
So this is also the rise in the electricity costs for consumers across our nation, the demand pressures that are created with AI on the electrical grid. It's straining the system. It has real time implications for a person's financial stability when it's coupled with other rising costs in their life. These impacts are significant.
Right.
So it's we got to pause the expansion, right? We have to conduct these comprehensive environmental and fiscal impact reviews. We have to reform these tax abatement policies. We have to require transparent water accounting, and we have to establish, federal privacy standards. If these benefits don't clearly outweigh the costs to local water, to schools, to grid
Sure.
reliability, then we should not accelerate it, because
Yeah.
innovation needs to serve the people, not extract off of us,
Right.
right?
And something moving this fast doesn't
Yes.
need help. If
No.
anything, it needs oversight. It needs to be
Exactly.
inspected closely because,
Yes.
it's moving like wildfire,
Yes.
and we know what wildfires are capable of. So,
Yes. Unfortunately.
let's move on to another aspect of Oregon Second District's resources, which is, what are your thoughts on closing off public lands for potentially hazardous resource extraction? And, personally, I have great love for the Owyhee Canyon lands.
Mhm.
And, there's this new gold cyanidation
Yes.
mine out in Vail. Maybe there's an environmental or resource related topic that you want to speak to, but those are the ones important to me.
No, I will answer to those.
Mm.
And my campaign manager as well is very much natural resource, loves the Owyhee outdoors. I mean, I grew up skiing, right? Mount
Right,
Hood
right.
National Forest here, Bachelor, river rafting on the John Day, the Grand Ronde, spending time in the Oregon outback in the high desert. But so for me, public lands, they're not disposable assets, right?
Right.
They're multi use trust lands held for current and future generations. And this is not some ideology. I'm not ideologically opposed to resource extraction, but
Right.
rural economies have long relied on timber, grazing, mining, and energy. But multi use does not mean no limits, right? So, extraction, it carries a really high environmental risk, like cyanide heap leach gold mining near these watershed systems, or the lithium projects near the fragile desert ecosystems, let alone the tribal cultural sites, right? So
I
the
mean, yeah.
threshold, yes, all the things.
Has
So
anyone has anyone decided to ask them yet?
yes,
Or,
I know. So the threshold for approval has to be extremely high. So in places like, let's talk about the Owyhee Canyon lands. We are talking about irreplaceable habitat, ranching livelihoods, in recreation economies,
yeah.
in deeply significant tribal landscapes. So once those are damaged, they're not coming back. So the question isn't simply jobs or minerals versus the environments. It's it's who is the long term, where is the long term water impact? Who bears the responsibility for the liability if contamination occurs? Are reclamation bonds, are they sufficient, let
Right.
alone enforceable? Does the short-term economic gain outweigh the permanent, ecological cost? And so too often these federal agencies, they approve these projects with these optimistic projections and
Right.
these underfunded
Right.
reclamation
Yeah.
guarantees, but they leave the taxpayers in the district holding the bag.
Right.
So if we can't demonstrate I'm talking zero groundwater contamination risk,
Right.
full
Absolutely.
bonding for cleanup, and meaningful economic benefit, including the revenue stability for those counties, then yes, portions of public land should absolutely be off limits. So I recognize that energy transition minerals are very important to our
Yeah.
economy, but we
Absolutely.
can't repeat that boom and bust extraction model that is
Right.
leaving these rural economies in abandoned sites with polluted water. So stewardship means knowing when to say yes,
Hmm.
but more importantly, it means when to say no,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that the word stewardship is part of this because, like you said, this is not about a complete um, withholding of Oregon's natural resources. This is about smart
Yes.
resource use, which is kind of what made Oregon in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, before corporations consolidated things and then private equity
Oh,
stripped
yeah.
them for parts, and you know what I'm saying, it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
this, it's this ugly boom and bust cycle that few people profit from, and none of them live here, or if they do, it's not for long after
Right.
until
Yeah.
things run dry.
Yes.
So speaking of things running dry, what are your thoughts on our Congressperson Cliff Bentz?
I think I need to get like a little like mock-up of him here. I'll point to him.
There's Cartoon Cliffy. Have you
I
seen
yes,
Cartoon
I have.
Cliffy?
That's I should put him in there. I love it.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a little plushie of Cartoon
I
Cliffy.
should. That would be an awesome, point to. Oh my goodness, you gave me a great idea. No, so to me, honestly, this isn't like a personality or a personal
Right,
contest. I view it more as a question of representation and direction.
right,
So Congressman Benz is consistent in his philosophy. I'll give him that, right?
right.
And his philosophy is deregulation, resource extraction and expansion in alignment with the national Republican leadership. And so that's where we differ, is in how these policies truly affect Eastern and Southern Oregon families in practice in real
Right,
time.
right,
So in healthcare, I believe we need structural reform to lower costs and stabilize our rural systems, where he has supported approaches that lean toward market deregulation rather than addressing the consolidation and the pricing power, right?
right. Yeah,
And then on public lands and natural resources, he's been more supportive of expanding our resource extraction on in federal land transfer
right,
conversations.
right.
And I believe that public lands, they, long-term trust, and it should not be put at risk without those rigorous environmental and fiscal safeguards.
Yeah,
And then when it comes to corporate influence in campaign finance, I've drawn a clear line against corporate PAC money and APAC money, which he takes both of, by the way.
yeah,
His PAC money is not significant, but he's still beholden to it.
yep,
And so I believe that that distinction matters in restoring this trust. But more broadly, I think our district deserves a representative who is willing to challenge power structures, right? Whether
right,
that's corporate consolidation, pharmaceutical pricing, or federal inaction on wildfire and water planning. So this isn't about personalities. It's about whose priorities are centered, right?
yeah,
I respect that he served. I just simply believe that the district needs a woefully different direction, and one that's grounded in accountability,
yeah,
stewardship, and economic fairness for working families.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's a great answer. And I'm pleased to say that everyone that I've asked about this has had something really substantive to say about how Cliff Bentz has governed,
Right. Right. We
during
can,
his
yeah,
tenure. Yeah.
exactly.
But essentially it does boil down to this person is not
Yeah.
representing even the people that he is set out to represent. And
Yeah.
so I think I think we're ready for the big one. This
Okay.
is the question,
Closing argument.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So how will your constituents know that you are effectively serving them?
They're going to know because I make it measurable, right?
Yeah.
But first off, it's accessibility. And we
Hmm.
can go on for days about his inaccessibility. So, my office will hold regular in district town halls across Southern and Eastern Oregon, and not just those friendly areas. I mean, if people can't reach their representative, then representation is not working.
It's
And
not a representative,
not a
really. I mean,
representative,
not if you
right?
think about it, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
anyway.
And then second is responsiveness, is that constituent services will be a priority, whether it's VA claims, social security delays, wildfire, insurance disputes, water permitting issues. My office will track the response times and then publish the service metrics annually. If we're not solving problems, you're going to see it. And
Right.
then third is transparency in the votes. I will publish plain language explanations for major votes, not press releases like he does, or sharing on his Twitter feed or on his Facebook, those
Right.
friendly faces, but the real breakdowns on what a bill does and why I supported it or why I opposed it and how it impacts CD2 specifically. And then fourth is that fiscal stewardship. And like him spending the most with Boebert to go to the inauguration, which
What,
I,
17 grand or something
oh my
ridiculous
God,
like
yeah,
that?
let's not even go there. That was
It
just
was
crazy.
like it was what,
Crazy.
10 times as much as is Idaho and right
Yeah,
across the
I
border
just
his
don't even,
colleague, right?
I don't even get it. So fiscal stewardship, right?
Yeah.
So I'll disclose the meetings with the industry groups and those
Yeah.
outside stakeholders. And if I meet with corporate interests, that information needs to be visible. And
Right.
trust grows when you bring sunlight, right? And then
Yeah.
it's back to normal. And finally is the outcomes. Are we stabilizing rural health care? Are wildfire mitigation funds actually reaching those communities faster? Are our schools and our infrastructure projects actually being funded and
Right.
delivered? So, if our policies aren't improving affordability and water security or our economic resilience in this district, then I'm not doing the job.
And
And
your constituents will
yes,
notice.
yes, and they will notice.
Yeah.
Because representation isn't just a title, even though I'd like to
Right.
have it. It's a measurable performance, right? It's data
Right.
driven
Right.
and
Right.
with results.
Well, it sounds like you've maybe helped to author some report cards in your time.
Yes.
So the idea of you being able to provide, an honest, straightforward report card for yourself
Yeah.
would be highly beneficial to people who are like, what does a congressperson do?
Right.
How would I know that my congressperson is on my side? I think that's awesome, and in your structured approach to this is the kind of thing that I personally want to see more of, not just in this district, but across our country, where they can break it down like that, and it's not about making unreasonable promises. What it is saying, look, there's a real, honest, good faith
Yes.
way to represent this district. You
Yes.
know it, I know it, and we can
Yep.
find out together.
Yeah.
Mary, you have been such a pleasure to talk to. I
So
so appreciate your candor, and I am looking forward to seeing what your campaign is doing next. And I'm also looking forward to speaking with you again soon.
thank you. Well, on here there is a contact form on the
Oh,
very last
okay.
On
Yep.
the yeah, over here, there's a contact form on my website. It's on the far right hand side under contact, and it is to engage with the voters. I
Right.
mean, do you have a question? Do you have feedback?
Right.
Do you want to just discuss some policies? So I would encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast to engage with me directly, because
Awesome.
that's what it is all about, right?
Yep.
Is having the engagement and hearing from the people in your district. So thank you for
Unless you're Cliff Bets.
unless
Mary, you are awesome. Thank you.
you are welcome. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.